In October 1347, 12 Genoese trading ships docked at the Sicilian port of Messina after a long voyage through the Black Sea. The people who gathered on the docks to greet them recoiled in horror. Most of the sailors aboard were dead, and those still alive were covered in black boils that oozed blood and pus. The harbor authorities ordered the ships out of port immediately, but it was already too late. The Black Death had arrived in Europe, and within 5 years, it would kill between 75 and 200 million people, wiping out roughly half the population of the continent and becoming the deadliest pandemic in human history. The disease was bubonic plague, caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, carried by fleas that lived on black rats. The rats traveled in the holds of trading ships, in grain carts, and in the baggage of travelers, spreading the plague along every trade route in the medieval world. The disease began in Central Asia, possibly in the steppes near modern-day Kyrgyzstan, where archaeologists have found mass graves dating to the 1330s. It spread east to China, where it killed millions, and west along the Silk Road to the ports of the Black Sea, where it leaped onto the Genoese ships that carried it to Messina. The symptoms were nightmarish. Within days of infection, victims developed large, painful swellings called buboes in the groin, armpits, and neck, some growing to the size of apples. Black spots appeared on the skin from internal bleeding, giving the disease its name. Victims burned with fever, vomited blood, and suffered agonizing pain. Most died within 5 days. A more lethal form, pneumonic plague, attacked the lungs and spread directly from person to person through coughs and breath. Those who contracted pneumonic plague were almost always dead within 48 hours. The plague swept through Italy, then France, Spain, England, and Germany with terrifying speed. It traveled along roads, rivers, and sea routes, reaching every corner of Europe within 3 years. Cities were the hardest hit because of their dense populations and filthy conditions. In Florence, over half the population died. In Paris, 800 people died every day at the peak. In Avignon, the Pope consecrated the Rhône River so that bodies could be thrown into it when the graveyards overflowed. In some villages, every single inhabitant perished, and the settlements were never resettled, becoming ghost towns that slowly returned to forest. Medieval medicine was helpless against the plague. Doctors believed disease was caused by corrupted air called miasma, and their treatments ranged from useless to deadly. They prescribed bloodletting, lancing the buboes, and drinking potions made of crushed emeralds. Some physicians wore long beak-shaped masks stuffed with herbs and flowers, believing the fragrance would purify the poisoned air. Others recommended sitting between 2 large fires, inhaling the fumes of burning juniper, or holding a bouquet of flowers to the nose. None of it worked. Doctors died at even higher rates than their patients because they came into close contact with the sick. The social fabric of Europe tore apart. Parents abandoned sick children, and children fled from dying parents. Priests refused to administer last rites. The dead lay in the streets for days because there was no one left to bury them. Some communities turned their terror into violence, massacring Jews whom they blamed for poisoning wells, despite the Pope condemning these attacks. Flagellant movements swept across Germany and the Low Countries, with crowds of penitents whipping themselves bloody in the streets, believing the plague was God's punishment and that their suffering might end it. When the Black Death finally subsided around 1353, Europe was unrecognizable. Half its people were dead. Entire industries had collapsed. But the survivors found themselves in a transformed world. With labor suddenly scarce, peasants could demand higher wages and better conditions. Serfdom, which had bound families to the land for generations, began to crumble. The church, which had been unable to explain or stop the plague, lost much of its moral authority. New ideas about medicine, science, and individual rights began to take root in the traumatized but strangely liberated society that emerged from the ashes. The Black Death did not just kill half of Europe. It broke the medieval world and cleared the ground for the Renaissance that followed.